Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Mental Matters. I am your host, Chance Dunkel, and I'm here with my co host, Kristen McQueenie. Last week, me and special guest Kurt Craze discussed homelessness and how homelessness and mental health coincide. This week, we are discussing communication and how to communicate with our peers, our providers, and anyone in the community. Kristen, how are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty well, thanks. I have to admit, this has been pretty exciting to do this podcast and communicate with others via voice. But there's so many ways that we can communicate.
We can verbally communicate, we can communicate with our body language, we can write things down, we can text things out, post on social media. There's all these different ways to communicate. What's your favorite way to communicate?
Oh, goodness. Well, I have to say, I usually communicate with verbalization over a meal. I have to say,
You get some good
communicating during a meal is probably one of my favorites.
you can get some pretty good conversations over a meal.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think it depends on what I'm eating that day as to where the conversation goes and who I'm eating with.
Yeah, I'll be honest, I've had some of my best conversations over a cup of coffee though.
Absolutely,
I
absolutely.
always joke with my one friend, because I usually have this thick wall built up, like I don't let people in. And one day we went to Tim Hortons and got pumpkin spice something, and I'm like, you usually break things down with a knife or a hammer. She broke me down with a cup of pumpkin spice.
Wow. Oh my goodness.
Okay, so we face different challenges every day, and you never know how you're going to communicate with each other. You don't know how to communicate with each other most of the time, but we
Hmm.
try our best.
Yeah.
I think you've experienced that before before our recording. How I'm, all over the place with my communication. So how can we be better at communicating? How can we communicate with our peers and our better question is, what is communication?
Okay. That is a good question because we got to know what we're talking about before we know where we're going with it.
Exactly.
So if we kind of look at it, we just said, we can use it verbally, we can use body language, we can use facial expressions, we can be communicating through a text message and so forth. But basically, the short version is we are sending a message to a listener, and then hopefully getting them to reply to the question or the concern or the issue that we communicated. So it's a back and forth sharing of information, a back and forth of solving problems between at least two individuals.
So
You
it's a
have to
conversation with emotion.
absolutely, you have to have a speaker and a listener in communications. So, right now, I'm the speaker because I'm utilizing my voice to share information. Our listeners of the podcast are the listeners in this particular communications. They have limitations in this mode of replying to us because they're not present. But you and I are communicating face to face through the podcast.
Sounds good. So in order to communicate, what are some things you need? Like we talk about the hierarchy of needs. What are things we need when we're communicating with someone?
Well, Chase, I have to say that one of the best things that we've done is build our lovely levels of trust. We've gotten to know each other, and as goofy as I get, and as much as I forget things, and sometimes I do all kinds of silly things with my language.
Like call me Chase instead of Chance.
Oh goodness, did I do that?
Don't worry, we joke that it's my Paw Patrol name. I spend a lot of time with young kids, so
So I think that's a perfect example of what I'm talking about. Sometimes we speak before thinking, or we speak a word out of habit. I'm so sorry.
it's okay. I think it's funny.
Of course he thinks it's funny.
Well, I mean, listen, I spend a lot of time with a 4-year-old, a 6-year-old, and a 9-year-old, and their grandpa and their uncle always call me Chase.
Gotcha.
So it's my Paw Patrol name.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. So the communication that you have with the smaller children is different than some of the communication that you have with your peers or providers.
Yeah, so I mean, if my provider called me Chase, I'd probably be like, "Are you talking to the right patient?"
Absolutely.
Just like if a 4-year-old asked me, about a medical thing, I'd be like, "Well, you're talking to the wrong person, but I can point him in the right direction." It's all about knowing who to talk to and when to talk to them.
I think that's a big deal, a very big deal. We talked about trust just a little bit ago, too, and we have to have a good level. Otherwise, we're not going to be truthful in our message. So, what was that question you asked me earlier before what was communication?
Oh, I was asking you about who we communicate with and how we communicate with them. So, what do we need to be able to communicate with our providers?
Okay.
And you kind of answered that with trust, and I said about the needs. So I
Mm.
believe like our some of our needs come out there. We need to we need to have acceptance. We need to have connection. And we need to be encouraged to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but a lot of our providers, they are very hidden. Like they don't share. They don't express themselves other than you know saying what we need and what they're gonna do.
They're
You
kind of short and to the point, aren't they?
Yeah, and that makes it really hard to have any sort of conversation with them. I have autism. I struggle opening up. So when I go into a doctor's office, I start joking around. I start laughing because I'm uncomfortable because there's no trust. There's no back and forth conversation. It's okay, this and this is going on. This is what we're doing, and then they're gone.
Gotcha. So it sounds like in some capacities, we need to have a conversation about how do we communicate with our medical providers in a way that we can express what's really happening and be a part of our treatment, not just, okay, thanks. I guess I'll come back in 6 weeks or 6 months. Sounds like you really want to know how to talk to them and be active in your treatment.
Well, yeah, that's part of our treatment team. So most people have, a doctor. Uh, Sometimes people have a psychiatrist. Sometimes people have a therapist. And any sort of stay anywhere, your treatment team is going to come up. Whether
Mm-hmm.
it's, a psychiatric stay, a medical stay, they're going to ask you who's part of your treatment team. And if there's no communication, there's no way for your treatment team to be involved and to provide you with your best care.
Gotcha. So here's what I'm thinking. I've had a conversation with this about a couple of other, in particular, peers your age that have also struggled with the same topic. They go in, a peer has, they've gone with a caregiver, and the caregiver seems to be the person talking, but not the patient, not the adolescent. And the caregiver's doing all the talking, and the doctor talks to the caregiver, and they decide what medication, and then the adolescent's like, okay, but I didn't get to talk about the side effects. I didn't get to ask any questions or tell you what my body's telling me.
We're so young that medical professionals don't always take us seriously.
In some
Like,
cases, yes.
or if we have, I don't have someone a parent that can go to appointments with me. Foster kid. I lost my mom a few months ago. Like, I'm on my own when it comes to medical appointments. So it's being so young and on my own and trying to go to an appointment and not being listened to is so aggravating. Because
Okay.
I just want to have that open communication. I want to be able to talk to my doctor and tell him, "Hey, I have this, and this going on." But I go in there, and because I'm laughing, or because I'm so young, they think, "Oh, you're faking it. Oh, you're in here seeking like drugs or something that is unnecessary."
Okay. So the message you're sending is not necessarily the message that we want to send because we're anxious.
Yeah.
And so our feelings got in the way of our active and clear communication.
Mhm. And I struggle with that, or I get the opposite response where they are medically gaslighting me. They're telling me, that this is wrong with me, but this is not what's wrong with me. Or they're
Okay.
saying that there's nothing wrong with me.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been struggling with some, like a gallbladder issue for the past couple of months.
Okay.
And every time I go in there, they tell me I have, like, a UTI.
Mm.
And I'm like, they're very, very different symptoms.
Hmm. So you're feeling lost and you're feeling unheard
Yeah.
and you still have a problem.
Yeah.
Okay, that's not good.
No.
Okay. So, so if there are other people out there who are having a similar problem, please seek medical treatment right away and keep talking. So,
Don't you know your body better than anyone else knows your body. You know what you're going through, and we can try to communicate that to our doctors, but our doctors aren't going to fully understand because they're not experiencing it.
so here's some thoughts and suggestions on clear, effective communication with providers. Okay. Because as I said earlier, we have to have a speaker and a listener. And then we take turns. We switch roles. So when we're at the provider, if we don't have the opportunity to take someone with us and nudge us and support us and say, hey, you talked about your symptoms, but you forgot to talk about that special event that's bothering you. It's great to have somebody to prompt us and say, you forgot something. That's a really big tool, but not everybody has someone who can go with them. So what do we do?
I mean, I guess something I try to do is I try to write it down.
Great.
Or my doctor actually has the option that I can message them on their like patient portal app.
Okay.
So I utilize those resources, but not everyone knows about them.
So we need to take the time to determine what the problem is and what our resources are. So, depending on your provider, you're absolutely right. You may have a portal, and that might give you an opportunity to communicate through texting, communicate through an email, perhaps. And that's one form of communication. It may be an opportunity for them to respond to you and say, "Ooh, let's move your appointment up. I want to see you sooner." It may be, "Oh, wow, we want to stop that medication. We want to try something else." But usually, two-way street.
I also think that there needs to be better communication between our doctors and their nurses. So something I experienced also is I call into the doctor's office, and I ask for someone to call me back, and it'll be a couple days before someone will call me back. But the nurse calls me back, and then she'll be like, "I have to talk to the doctor." Let me call the doctor, and then I'll call you right back. It'll be another couple days. And
Mm-hmm.
in those days, I've already been to the ER twice trying to figure this problem out.
Absolutely.
So we need our providers to communicate too.
Mm-hmm. So I can say from an adult perspective that has been working in the medical field, I can say there's a couple of things that are contributing to that. Completely aside from communication itself, we're not done with the effects of COVID. We are still seeing it as we're seeing the shortage of staff to call you back. We're seeing the shortage in staff that are unable to deliver a message immediately because there aren't enough staff. There's just a bigger gap.
But for someone that's experienced trauma, it makes it hard. And so we have these trauma responses where we fight, we flight, we freeze, we fawn.
Mm-hmm.
I typically flight or freeze. So
Absolutely.
I either run from my problems,
Mm-hmm.
and if I don't feel heard and safe, I run from the provider, or I freeze and I forget what I need to talk to them about. I forget to go to appointments, and I just get scared.
Absolutely. This is a very common response for many individuals, especially around the medical aspect. So, writing that list, sending that message, taking someone with you, those are all opportunities, but we need to be specific. So, for example, if one of the symptoms that someone is experiencing for, oh, let's just say anxiety for today. Okay, so somebody's anxious and they go to the doctor and they take somebody with them, so maybe they feel a little more comfortable, but just got them in the door. They still don't feel comfortable to speak a lot about the symptoms. It can be difficult, so we have to make sure that we're constantly keeping up on practicing, talking to our peers about what's going on, practicing to talk to a teacher a guidance counselor, practice talking to a trusted neighbor, something of the someone else in our circle, so that when we get to the doctor, it's not the first time we're addressing the concerns or talking about our symptoms and concerns.
So it's like a mock trial.
Yeah, practice.
Cool. But how do we, we've talked about boundaries before. I think we talked about it in our first episode we produced.
Mm-hmm.
How do we know what boundaries we can set with our providers and what to say and do to make sure those boundaries stay in place?
I like direct communication. Sarcasm is a form of communication that is fun with our peers when we're being goofy and hanging out and just telling jokes, playing tricks on our pals. But it's not a very good form of communication when we're addressing a provider. So, one of the things that's very important is making sure that we're speaking directly, specifically, concise, and with respect.
So when the doctor is palpating someone's stomach and they get very anxious because of trauma, they should say, I'm not comfortable with this, or this is not acceptable.
Speaking up. Yeah, absolutely. You could say, I'm not comfortable with this, or please stop.
Okay.
Okay. So those boundaries are important, and they may say, oh, does that hurt? And then that's an opportunity for us to educate our providers about a piece of our life that maybe they're not aware of.
So knowing your limits, knowing your values, and listening to your emotions.
Absolutely. Your provider sees so many people in a day, and we want to make sure that when they are spending time with you, that they are getting clear information and determining what's important to you, how you're feeling about things. For example, a medication, you have lots of options out there. And if we don't speak up and say, ooh, I tried that before, it doesn't work for me, they may prescribe it again.
How do we prevent that, though? How do we get our doctors to listen to us?
Direct communication. You may even have to look them in your eyes. Doc, look over here, because I know you got that computer and you're typing away, but I really need you to look at me for a minute.
Yeah, I experienced that recently too. I was talking to my one doctor, and I said, "Hey, I've had this medication before. It doesn't work." He put me on it, and for 3 weeks, I was a mess, really, all over the place, emotionally unstable.
Mm-hmm.
And I go into his office last week, and I'm like, "Hey, doc, this medication isn't working. Like I told you before, it didn't work, and I'm experiencing negative symptoms now." And instead of putting me on a different medication, he's like, okay, well, we're just going to discontinue this medication.
Okay. So he heard the part where it wasn't working, and that's a good thing. Let me ask you a question. Would you still want to try a different medication?
I wasn't sure at the time. Like, I'm open to any suggestions that the doctor has. So I am always willing to listen and see what, I'm trying anything once. That's who I am. I'll try anything one time.
Uh-huh.
And at the time I was nervous. I didn't want to bring it up. But
so you fawned.
Yeah.
You were people pleasing. You stopped talking. You said, okay, doc, we won't take it anymore. And we just let it go.
Yeah.
And then you left.
I did.
Okay.
I did schedule a new appointment, though.
But that's a bonus. That is good. You have an opportunity to go back and say, okay, hold on a second. I didn't do so great the last time. I need to be honest with you. I was glad in this way. I was glad maybe to discontinue what's not working. But I didn't get far enough and let you know I wanted to know about my other options.
Yeah.
I got anxious and I shut down. So, Doc, I need you to know sometimes I get anxious and I get real quiet and I stop talking.
Yeah.
And so when that happens, Doc, I need you to just kind of
me.
Yes, prompt me. Your doctor is going to be able to identify and help you because they're learning more about you.
I've been seeing this office for over a year, so I didn't even think of that.
Yeah. It's crazy. We don't always see the same providers.
That's true.
And
I guess I did just switch providers in the office, so.
it depends. It depends on what's good for us. And it's okay to say no, thank you. This isn't working. What are my options?
So we've talked about communication with our providers. What about communications with our friends?
Oh boy. That's where I get into a lot of sarcasm and talking with my hands and oh goodness, I probably talk a little faster during those conversations and I definitely laugh a whole lot more during that conversation.
Yeah, I can see that why, because you're comfortable with them. You've built some sort of level of trust. You're not scared to say what's on your mind. You can be assertive, and you can you have respect for them.
I do. Except sometimes when my friend is a little crabby, she gets a little passive aggressive. So sarcasm, passive aggressive, that's definitely something that becomes hard. I'm not sure what her message is. I'm not sure what she wants from me or doesn't want from me when that happens.
So, who has high openness of communication?
Mm. So, high openness to communications. These are individuals that are really in a place where they are looking for, well, high openness of communications. They're usually more assertive, they're usually more aggressive, they're more willing to speak ahead, speak up. And depending on the stereotype, they may say that's the angry person, or that's the complainer, or that's the hypochondriac. They're always complaining. Well, no, they're just being assertive about what's wrong.
So they're the opposite of low openness of communication, which is people who are passive aggressive or passive.
Correct. My girlfriend. Whew. Yeah.
So there's high openness of communication, there's low openness of communication, there's low consideration for others, and there's high consideration for others.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you find yourself?
Ooh. Dun dun dun. Oh my goodness, that's a hard question. Well, I guess it depends on who I am with. If I mean, I'm 50 years old at this point. I've learned to communicate with a lot of people. So some of them I am more assertive. I am more open to high communication. But I sometimes am more on the assertive side than the aggressive side. I don't want to make people start feeling uncomfortable and turn off their listening ears. I want them to hear my message.
I get that. So I find myself most of the time being more passive around my family and assertive around my friends. An example is anytime my grandma calls me, I'm passive. I fawn. What do you want, Grandma? What can I do for you? What do you need? That sort of thing. But anytime my friend calls, I'm like assertive, and I finally got to use my big boy voice.
Ooh.
Something I have not done in forever and never done with my friend.
Oh my
Because I
gosh.
haven't felt the need. But yesterday, I was having a really rough day, and I looked at my friend, and we're sitting at the table, and she asked me to do something, and I finally said no. It wasn't nothing bad.
You said no, you stood up for yourself?
I did.
You used a healthy boundary?
I did. I communicated effectively.
Oh, that's amazing. I'm so proud of you. Wow, the crowd goes wild.
Yeah, so she asked me to take the dogs for a walk, but I really was not in a place where I felt comfortable doing so, just because I was so emotionally all over the place. And I said no, and I was terrified, but she responded really well.
Okay. What happened then? Who walked the dogs?
Well, no one walked the dogs. We just sat at the table, and we ended up going and doing the rest of the chores we needed to do for the day. She wasn't upset, and the dogs, they didn't really need walked. I mean, it's good for a dog to be walked, but
They already had their time for the day.
there's a big yard. They go outside, they run around, they chase each other. They get their energy out.
All right. So we just changed up the plan and it was still okay.
Yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful. Oh my goodness gracious. Boundaries, communication, honesty. Ding, 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 ding. I don't know about you, but I think that helps me build trust with people, and it helps me trust them. Be honest. Tell me the truth. I don't have to like the truth, but I can hear the truth easier than I can hear a lie, because that makes it so much more complicated and
I think
difficult.
telling the truth is hard for people because we're taught young if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. But sometimes it needs to be said in order to build those boundaries.
Absolutely. And so, if we're at a medical provider seeking an appointment, and we're talking about, what kind of treatment options we have, we need to use a polite tone, but we can't just not ask.
So we need to be assertive at doctor's appointments. We need to, you know, be polite, but also be be honest, be open, and do what we need to do for ourselves.
Chance, you just wrapped that up into a nice little bow. Boom! Ah.
Hey, maybe it's my day with words.
You are. I'm going to give you a gold star for communications during the podcast period. Thank you, everybody. Chance, he's telling everybody just the way it is.
But with our friends, we can be a little more passive. We can, we still have to be assertive, but not as assertive as if we're in a medical appointment. We can joke around, we can laugh, we can be sarcastic, and we can feel safe enough to not need to protect ourselves.
Yes. The different situations, different forms of communication. Just like, any other environment. I'm going to communicate at a wedding differently than I'm going to communicate at a funeral. I'm going to communicate differently at a picnic. I'm going to communicate differently at a fancy dance. I'm 50. I don't get any more fancy dances, so I guess that's just a hope.
We can go contra dancing after this.
Okay. we'll figure it out, right?
Right. Oh. No, it's important to set boundaries. It's important for communication. But we need to communicate with ourselves, too. So we've talked about communicating with our providers. We talked about communicating with our friends. How do we communicate with ourselves? How do we tell ourselves what we need? Because we always put ourselves on the back burner.
Mm-hmm.
We're taught, we need to take care of others. We need to help others. But who looks out for us? We do. We're supposed to look out for ourselves. We're supposed to take care of ourselves. So we need to communicate what we need to ourselves.
So this goes back to listening to what your body tells you. When your stomach is growling and it's irritating and you know that you haven't eaten in probably 6 hours, you're going to guess that your body's talking to you and saying, hello, we're hungry. We'd really like a big steak with nice potatoes and a side of gravy. Don't forget the salad, and don't give me any of that non-fat dressing. So we got to listen to our body.
We gotta listen to our emotions.
Yes.
If we're sad, we have to find out why we're sad.
Yes.
So before we started this episode, I was on the verge of crying. Why was I on the verge of crying? We have to communicate that with ourselves. We're on the verge of crying because we're worried that something's wrong.
Absolutely. You have to be honest with yourself.
And you can't trust other people until you trust yourself.
Correct.
So, in order to properly communicate, you have to learn to trust yourself, because once you trust yourself, you can start to trust and open up to other people who can then help you better take care of yourself.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh, I'm so glad I get to be a part of this with you because you're so smart.
Hey, I couldn't do it without you.
I'm so giggly. Must have been all that hot chocolate I had before I showed up. Whew.
Sounds like we both need some coffee, though.
I know. Well, I'm going to communicate some of my needs. How are we doing? Because some of my needs are like, I love talking with you. This is a great place. What else do we have to talk about today? Anything else? Or are we at a place where maybe we should take a break and get some more hot chocolate?
I think we should get some more hot chocolate.
All right.
Because we talked about our boundaries. We talked about our openness of communication and our consideration for others. We've talked about, our hierarchy of needs. We've talked about everything we need to talk about and anything we could talk about, really.
Yeah.
So I think this is a good place to wrap up and say to stay safe, stay vigilant, and be your best version of you. We'll see you on the next episode.
See you later, guys.